The second coming has come and gone. I know, I'm the one who autopsied him. It started with a black bag over my head. 6 or 7 men dragged me off the street as I was heading home from work, putting a gun to my ribs in the back of a yellow car. They meticulously detailed what would happen to my family if I didn't comply. Before that moment, Father Tan was just a cadaver. I hadn't given it a second thought. I wasn't prepared for what they told me. By the time they loaded me onto a helicopter, I was ready to do whatever they wanted. I arrived at the black site, kicked off the plane, my feet splashing in thick, churning mud. The hood was yanked off so hard it stung the bridge of my nose, and I got my first look at the place. Did it meet expectations? I didn't really have any. I didn't know where I was going or what it was supposed to look like. Still, the sight astonished me. A deserted village nestled in the forest, mostly one-room shacks with corrugated iron roofs here and there. A few scorched garden patches remained, dying pepper plants left to rot, their fruits crushed into the dirt under the boots of soldiers in all black. Decayed fences, broken pig and goat troughs, and then, perched regally on a hillock like an architectural scare tactic, a 3-story hospital of cutting-edge glass and steel, built where asphalt was still a rumor. On paper, a non-profit charity had placed it here to research strange diseases and find cures in the heart of the desolate forest. Off paper, it had always belonged to CEI, a convenient place for testing bizarre things with smallpox in their name, and when the time came, a convenient place to dissect the impossible. Imagine my face when armed men led me into an office with my name on the door, only to discover I'd be heading their biggest project in recent memory. The door had a formal-looking black sign, Head of Research, as if I'd been working there all along. My first thought was, how long do they intend to keep me here? But that feeling quickly faded. The hospital became my home, and still is. Less than 24 hours after arriving, I had my feet on the desk, barking orders at technicians. I slipped into that role easier than I'd care to admit, because, truthfully, what they hooked me with was scientific curiosity. That's how they compelled my consent. So, after the first day, no one had to point a gun at me anymore. They didn't need to. The moment I saw what lay within the Savior's chest cavity, I became docile property. No more me, only the project, only discovery and revelation. On the operating table, nestled within the flesh of an ordinary-looking man, was a divine light, burning white-hot, a pinprick in the fabric of reality. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like my whole life I'd only seen flat, 2-dimensional shadows, and then suddenly glimpsed 3-dimensional objects casting them. Since I was taken, I haven't seen my children. I can't even say their names. After the first surgery, I was no longer the same person. No one there was sane after the first blade cut into his flesh. The attrition rate was horrific. Every day, a nurse would suddenly bear stigmata, or an atheist technician would hear a calling to transcribe the Third Testament. The guards handled the purification of the disobedient. Scientists and doctors in a panic were lined up one by one, pressed against the bare brick wall in the jungle heat, and shot. I remember once, smoking in the cafeteria between 2 surgeries, my hands trembling, trying to ignore the asterisk bang 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 outside. A few stubborn colleagues had just been executed. I finished my smoke and went back to the operating table, trying to swallow the feeling that I was the worst kind of traitor. Tomorrow, there would be new faces in scrubs asking for orders, new hands sent from God knows where. Back to work, cataloging divinity. Sometimes I thought I would join the dissenters, those who found religion in a black site laboratory. But the thing we extracted from him, that dazzlingly indigestible riddle, it swallowed the entire project. Anything we learned about it was a quantum leap in microbiological understanding. We tried everything we could get our hands on. Plants, animals, humans, I avoided looking into the eyes of any of them. Silent people plucked from some silent corner of the earth where their absence would go unnoticed. Everyone was afraid. Did they know? I mean, did they truly know the pain awaiting them? Surely not. I guess they thought they'd be shot, not wake up with their mouths full of dog teeth. It's shameful to say, but such results excited me, even aroused me. It wasn't until everything fell apart, and I missed the evacuation that I had a chance to sift through the top-secret files and discovered I wasn't chosen for being a microbiology genius, but because my psychological profile concluded I would do anything as long as a sufficiently large mystery dangled before me. Plus, I was actually pretty good at project management. Geniuses usually struggle with sending memos or tracking performance metrics. Fortunately, I'm no genius. Sometimes I even felt enlightened working with some of my subordinates, yet still above them in rank. For example, Dr. Coach. He was probably the smartest person I'd ever met. No real academic career because he had a habit of getting stuck on things that were either unsolvable or that no one cared about. But it was clear that if he could focus on the right thing, he could make a name for himself in any field. Just a little more sanity, he was eccentric, to put it mildly. He'd walk into class barefoot. When grading papers, he'd give the whole class a B to get it over with. He'd throw staples at the department head. Things like that, intelligent but not at all wise. The project crushed him, crushed his worldview, crushed his reason, and eventually his body. You might think the problem was forcing an ultra-rational person to deal with the sacred, but if anything, he handled it too well. He was the first to read the Third Testament without going mad. Or more accurately, without going mad immediately. Or perhaps he was already mad. Either way, he collected all the random scribbles and fragments of verses from the deceased, compiling them into a complete text. Then he read it, walked out of the room as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Those who read it after him weren't so lucky, but Dr. Coach continued to work for a few more days. Measuring this, recording that, quietly receding into the background, slipping from my attention. Meanwhile, I was busy trying to scan the Third Testament into a computer without causing chaos. Machines, like readers, would self-destruct halfway through. Not Coach, he still seemed fine. I should have been more vigilant. The first clue was when I visited his office. A cramped cubby, metal walls and floor, no windows because it was underground, the counter cluttered with tools. It was always messy and smelled a bit, but usually just the smell of a scientist who skipped showers. That day, when he opened the door for me, an off smell hit me. A bit like decay, but not quite, more like mildew. Of course, he was allowed to do his own experiments after hours, and I thought that was it. I dismissed it with many other things on my mind, but the smell grew heavier each day. The next day I returned, my nose stinging a little more, the odor lingering in my sinuses longer. And Coach looked worse each day, still not alarmingly so, just normal for a man like him. I was used to scientists obsessed with a problem, something they wouldn't share until they were certain they had it. He was that type, and I guessed when he was ready, he'd show me something that would either stun me or be a silly trick like rewiring a microwave to heat food more evenly. Sometimes I wonder if I could have done anything if I'd noticed sooner. Someone smarter might have recognized the strange chemical mixtures on the shelves or understood those bizarre odors. But I didn't. All I can say is I was lucky my office was above ground. By the time his little project chewed through his office floor, he had killed 36 people with homemade nerve gas. Fortunately for the facility, it was prepared for such an attack. The automated security system quickly locked down the entire floor, so the damage wasn't too extensive. It could have been much worse, but strangely, the ventilation system didn't work. Theoretically, it should have cleared the air in less than a day. Yet 4 hours later, the gas concentration was unchanged. Initial investigations had to be conducted remotely. CCTV in his room was distorted, something was corroding the cameras. Based on a few supply requisitions, we guessed he was cultivating an unusual fungus to create a biological weapon, something very potent, and we were helpless. We could only wait, praying the terrible concoction he brewed would exhaust itself. What the CCTV recorded was grim and hard to stomach. 8 scientists slumped over their desks. Collapsed, black blood pouring from their mouths. Pitch black on the grainy black and white screen. But what haunted me more were the assistants. Dozens of young men and women too young to be in this place. They had so much to live for, and each of them was terrified of what was to come. They lay there amidst their unfinished work. In the labs, broken beakers, tangled machines. In the bedrooms, some lay as if in peaceful sleep, some couples embraced in secret rendezvous they thought no one knew about. Throughout the floor, bodies sprawled on the floor in strange postures, and again, that black fluid oozed from every natural orifice, soaking their clothes, their chests, and groins. I remember sitting there watching them twitch, foam at the mouth, waiting for death. Yet hours passed, we waited for the toxic gas extraction system 1224. Nothing changed, as if everything was frozen in time. Then somehow, the lights on that entire floor went out with a asterisk thump asterisk. Emergency lights flickered on, casting a red glow over everything, and combined with the poor quality cameras, it looked like an old video game. Grainy, blurry, we guessed Coach had set a timer for the electrical system, though even that guess was illogical. His expertise was biochemistry, while the security system here was state-of-the-art. But what else could we guess? Had someone snuck in and flipped a switch? Then it was time to go in. 60 hours after the floor lockdown, we were forced to. Too much valuable material to abandon, plus reports of strange noises downstairs. The guard at the door said he heard very faint sounds from the other side. Footsteps, they thought. I dismissed it, nonsense. I told them and told myself the same. Nevertheless, we brought guns down because if Coach was clever enough to orchestrate this nightmare, who's to say he hadn't created his own gas mask? You'd think I'd be used to wearing hazmat suits. I am, actually, but entering that sealed floor was a different matter entirely. The face shield was suffocating, the squeak of rubber against rubber grating. My breathing was too loud, and every time the comms in my helmet crackled with a soldier's shout, I felt like jumping. The door actually opened. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight. The thick, hazy air was sharply pierced by the red glow of the emergency lights. Iron bars, air vents, open doors. Everything was either blood red or pitch black. There was too much darkness for the place to feel safe. It didn't help that a few flickering lights and sirens pulsed red light in rhythmic sweeps. My God, even the 4 armed soldiers looked uneasy. We passed quite a few bodies on the way to Coach's room. Everyone lay exactly as they had on the CCTV. At least, as far as I could tell. It sounds idiotic, but I leaned close to a few, examining them carefully, just to be sure. Reports of footsteps had seeped into my mind. I couldn't shake the thought that we weren't alone down there. When the door to Coach's room opened, the sight froze me in place. The soldiers focused on the strange biomass in the corner of the room. To me, at that moment, it was just a thick clump of fungal wings creeping up the wall, pulsing veins like capillaries in an eye. But what chilled me to the bone was the empty table. The last time the camera was clear, Coach was there, stiff as a board. Blood seeped from his open eyes, ran across the table, and dripped steadily onto the floor. The stain was still there, you could even see the faint imprint where his head had rested, but the body was gone. This, more than the disgusting fungal mass that consumed an entire wall, terrified me. That fungal mass had spewed enough toxic gas to kill half the base. At least it was stationary. In other circumstances, I might even have found it interesting. But Coach, he had clearly slipped from the harness. He had lain still for days to deceive us. Uh-oh, I thought of the bodies we had just passed. They lay still, but not exactly lifeless like porcelain dolls. Something was working behind their eyes. What do we do with this? A soldier asked. Take a sample, burn the rest, I replied. If the gas concentration doesn't drop in a week, bleach the entire floor with white phosphorus. All the while, my eyes darted around the space, under the table, on top of the cabinets. If Coach wasn't at the table, where was he? Where did this devil come from? The soldier mumbled as he placed a series of thermite charges on the thickest fungal network. The fungal mass seemed to shrink under his hand, but otherwise remained inert. He probably took some tissue samples from the subject, I said. We know his tissue stimulates abnormal proliferation in plant and animal tissue, which is why the gas concentration hasn't dropped. What is it metabolizing? I gave the soldier a strange look. How does he know that? It's not just educated people, he muttered. Right, I shook my head slightly. It's not metabolizing anything except his tissue. To be blunt, think of the fish and loaves. This is what we've known about his tissue for a long time, spontaneous creation of matter and energy from nothing. But I have to admit, Coach came up with a strange application. He created an infinite biological weapon. Why? I was about to answer. I didn't know anything anyway when a loud noise drew us all back to the door. Outside, there was only darkness, rhythmically broken by the flashing red light. For a split second, it revealed the silhouette of a man standing in the hallway. Soldiers cursed, raising their guns. By the time the lights flared again, the shadow was gone. Who was that? Someone shouted. Must be Coach, another replied. It's done, I yelled, pointing at the explosives. No more miracles for you. You've created your own. A voice boomed, so deep it vibrated my bones. The soldiers immediately spun around, and I took a beat before daring to look at the corner of the room. I knew what I would see, but God, I didn't want to. There are other gardens, but not for you. Don't spoil the others. Coach emerged from the wall, from that mass, tearing himself out with a squelching sound. He stood there, not quite naked, as his skin had begun to absorb his clothes, looking like a burn victim slathered in clay. He loves you. Despite everything, he loves you, and there is a place in heaven for everyone. But it is time. I didn't blame the soldier who pulled the trigger, not just because Coach was speaking with a mouth that grew crookedly on his lower abdomen, but because his words drilled straight into my head like someone pressing a red-hot needle into a dental nerve, making my eyes cross, my hands ache, my nose bleed. 2 soldiers vomited profusely, their thick puke splattering their faces through their visors. They were the first 2 to collapse. They didn't see what hit them, and I was glad for that. Coach, angered by the gunfire, moved with dancer-like fluidity. I stumbled into the hallway as he tore them apart, his arms seeming to phase through their protective gear. The remaining soldier, quick to pull the trigger, ran beside me as we escaped. Not far from the exit, I hoped we'd make it. I hoped in just a few more hours, I could push the images of Coach tearing human flesh like paper into some dark corner of my mind and continue living. But only a few more steps in the darkness, and the soldier turned back, firing blindly down the hallway behind us. That was a mistake. For half a second he turned his head, he didn't see a body on the floor. I jumped over it, he didn't. I only realized no one was beside me when the gunfire faded behind me as I left him. A bullet whizzed past a panel next to my head. To this day, I suspect it wasn't a stray bullet but intentional. Revenge for me running away alone. I still didn't look back. Not until I reached the security door, where I frantically slammed my thumb on the keypad as my ears began to pick up approaching footsteps, sounds muffled by protective gear. God, I couldn't help it. I looked. There was nothing left for me to do but wait for security to confirm the door open, and what if they didn't? Maybe I'd stand there forever, staring into space, while Coach got closer and closer. Before I could comprehend what I was doing, I turned back and saw the soldier with the gun. Coach's room was out of sight. I don't know if he did that to the other 2, but the man I saw had turned into a network of yellow and red, tearing, sticking to both ceiling and floor, and was charging towards me on all 4s, his limbs unnaturally long. It was Coach. His eyes bulged, his jaw agape, a missing piece of his skull, but his mouth made no sound, still muttering, repeating words almost in sync with his gallop. It took me days to understand what he was saying. Fortunately, before he reached me, the door burst open and a hail of bullets shredded the hallway in front of us. Coach, quick as a flash, slid into some dark crevice. They pulled me to safety before the worst could happen. As soon as I was through the door, I ordered white phosphorus and incinerated the entire floor. White flames consumed everything on command. When it was done, only metal remained, and in many places, it had melted and cooled into grotesque shapes on the floor. I still tried to block any proposals to reclaim the lost space. My superiors were furious about how much area was lost. I argued the risk of contamination was too great. Of course, I hid the fact that I had returned one quiet night, pressing my ear against the thick steel wall next to an air duct on that floor. Very faintly, I heard Coach whispering. It was only then that I discovered the final clue to understanding what Coach had been muttering as he charged at me in the flickering red light of the dark hallway. "We love you, we love you. We love you, we love you, we love you." To this day, the cameras still show that floor as empty and sterile. But I can't shake the feeling that if I opened it, I would see Coach slithering out of some forgotten pipe. Perhaps tattered by time, but still Coach. Both terrifying and distorted, yearning to spread the very scripture that had twisted his mind and body, which had led him to seek something that could end the world. And the worst part, what if what he said to me in the hallway was true? What if he didn't act out of hatred, but out of love? At the time, I assumed the force we encountered was hostile. But what if it wasn't? Everyone who came near the Third Testament committed suicide, and until Coach, I still thought it was a form of twisted revenge. But suppose it wasn't. Suppose he didn't act out of malice. What would that mean for me? Forgiveness. If so, that terrifies me most. Because after all this, I'm not sure I could resist such an invitation. For weeks, I lay awake wondering what was in those words that made a man like Coach do what he did. Yet despite everything, I still haven't read the Third Testament. Coach was a genius and he fell. I know I've done some twisted things in the name of scientific curiosity, but I'm not afraid to admit it. I'm a coward, I'm afraid to die. Curiosity only takes you so far, And after seeing what happened to everyone who read that thing, I simply can't bring myself to risk it. Whatever the third testament is, listening to it is not good for your health. I don't think I deserve forgiveness if that's what he's offering. To be fair, among all those who made it onto the evacuation, I was the one who missed the Botan deservedly so. Walking wasn't an option. Even if I could crawl hundreds of miles through the rainforest, I'd still have to reach the outermost fence first. And there, the chemical pits where they dumped bodies had fermented something putrid. Mounds of ash, mud, and bones occasionally sang, startling birds in the canopy, sending them soaring into strange formations in the sky. If they can sing, they must have mouths, right? And if they have mouths, what else? I thought of Coach. I thought of what hands would reach out to drag me into those putrid mud pools, filled with years of rotting flesh, and drown me in filth. The thought made me shiver. I could risk sneaking through, but outside the hospital, it really wasn't safe. Inside wasn't much safer, to be fair. But what choice did I have? At least here, there was still electricity, internet, enough food for a century, and security doors keeping everything in sublevel 1 locked down. Outside, occasionally, I saw something moving very fast between the old houses. Trees swayed and shook against the glass wall where the forest had crept close, vines twisted into bizarre messages. I squeezed my eyes shut every time I had to pass by. But even with my eyes closed, I heard the rasping of sinews, the clinging plants scraping against the glass. They want me, they're hungry. How many corpses buried out there are rotting, decaying, reinfected with divinity? What kind of water is seeping through the earth here? Nothing could make me open that door and trek through those trees. He might forgive, but I don't think my old test subjects would. And downstairs, I never met him when he was alive. I don't know where they dug him up from or why. I guess he angered the wrong person, was shot, and got back up. Maybe they shot him again, and he got back up again. Maybe 5 times, 10 times. I don't know, but eventually someone realized they had an anomaly on their hands. Maybe I wasn't even the first person to try to dissect him. It's strange that no one ever said who he was. We just knew. And years later, I ask myself who gave birth to him, who loved him, raised him. I often wonder if things were meant to be this way, or if he just happened to cross the wrong person at the worst possible time. The savior arrived, and the first thing we did was cut him open. Failure was inevitable. Everything in the project began to unravel about half a year after the first incision. The turnover rate in the research team was one thing. It turned out many of the soldiers also had a rebellious streak. Not only were we experiencing hallucinations and voices, but at times, they themselves understood what they were a part of. The organization preferred to compartmentalize information, but ultimately, there was only so much they could contain. By the time the armed men in the basement realized the religious element, everything broke. Science could be contained. Soldiers with guns breaking meant utter collapse. Most of his body was stored on the lowest floor for easy cooling. Outside was a long corridor leading to a massive central chamber, wide enough to drive 4 or 5 cars abreast. There, the first soldier hanged himself. Simple as that. They removed the body and cleaned up. It happened not long after the coach incident. He was, in fact, one of the people who saved me at the door. Then, not long after, 2 more went down there and hanged themselves. Then 5, then 8. And on the surface, people started shooting themselves in the head in their bedrooms, in the cafeteria. While on guard duty outside, looking at the forest, a cigarette dangling from their lips. It seemed random, but there was a clear, escalating pattern. When they started killing their own friends, everything spiraled out of control. There wasn't enough time to bring in new troops to fill the gaps. Tasks started getting missed, and when they were missed, no one brought them up again. One lab was written off because a test subject's body was left forgotten over the weekend. By the time they opened the door, the flesh had climbed the walls. Not enough people to handle it, so they left it to be dealt with later, moving on to another section. But they forgot to inform the researcher for that room. On Monday, he opened the door and walked in, probably like hitting a wall of sourdough. I only hope he suffocated quickly, but who knows, that thing had no rules. Maybe he's still in there now, screaming for air. And that tunnel, people just kept going down there and hanging themselves. Every day I woke up, a few more researchers were gone, along with several soldiers who had vanished. The pace was dizzying. Of the 600 people at the facility, most soon disappeared. God knows when security stopped moving the bodies to the basement, just another task lost to the chaos. By the time the evacuation order came, only 100 people remained. I estimate about 400 people had hanged themselves in that tunnel. Since the project collapsed, I've only gone down to see him once. Only mustered the courage to search once and almost didn't make it back. I felt compelled to confront it, to acknowledge my role. But that meant getting to the door at the end of the tunnel. And by then, that place was pitch black, lit only by my flashlight and almost entirely blocked by hanging corpses. So many, crammed so close together that I couldn't move forward without bumping into a body. Strangely, it reminded me of a jungle. A dense, suffocating forest woven from dry skin and brittle sinews, different colors and shapes, and of course, varying stages of decomposition. Some had lost noses, lips, eyes, some were slightly bloated but still recognizable, not quite friends. I don't know if I ever had any real friends on this project, but they were colleagues, people I was responsible for managing. They looked sad, everyone was sad. They should have been buried at home with their families instead of being stuck in this ultimate wilderness. Of course, the organization would do everything to keep the truth from getting out. I'm still being watched by them. Anything I post is filtered. Those arrogant bastards know no one would believe me. There are no project records anywhere. All those people became shadows in a system too vast for anyone to track. Do you know how many people go missing in the US every year? In Europe. In the whole world, God, this project is just a drop in the ocean. I wanted it to end. I wanted to see if I could extract any answers from him. The thought that this nightmare needed a conclusion gave me the strength to push past the first corpse and go deeper into the tunnel. It felt like approaching a stage during a performance, except it was utterly silent, and the friends I squeezed past swayed gently. The sound of homemade nooses tightening in the dark. Worst of all was the limited visibility. My light was just a lonely, circular disc, and God, it was pitch black like the bottom of a cave, evoking the feeling of deep-sea diving. With so many bodies, my vision didn't extend beyond an arm's length. I remember panicking when I realized how easy it was to get lost. And what if those souls didn't let me leave? What if I would wander for hours, days, in endless loops? The wall was right here, and I didn't even know it, just bone and teeth and ribs and hanging intestines. All of it cold as ice, cold as meat you pull from the supermarket fridge. It sounds crude, but it was true, truly horrific. The rotting, foul-smelling corpses were easier to bear, almost like props. No, don't misunderstand. My brain still screamed that they weren't props, but it was easier to deceive myself when they no longer had eyes. But fresh bodies sometimes still held expressions of anger or sadness on their faces. They made me feel watched, and their icy coldness, the standing water. Every time I bumped into someone, I had to bite my lip to keep from moaning, and they moved. Not in that way, but there was no draft down there. Everything was perfectly still. They had been still for months since the project shut down. Then I fumbled my way in, stirring them, and they all turned into a giant Newton's cradle, a static system into which I injected energy. They began to sway, to swing and collide. I accidentally nudged one, and a moment later it swung back, brushing against my cheek or arm as its momentum carried it back and forth. 10 minutes was too far to turn back. That's when the real nightmare began. It started subtly. I lost the ability to track which corpse was where and which ones were swaying because I had bumped them. Then a finger ran through my hair. I gasped. A hand touched my beard, my face. I forced myself forward, looking straight ahead, but then I met the eyes of too many dead people to consider it a coincidence. Their expressions changed from mournful, desolate, to resentful, cruel, a sneer, a mocking curve of the lips. Then came the unmistakable feeling that someone had deliberately grabbed my hand. I had to pull hard to break free, not daring to look back, not daring to face the possibility of seeing someone still moving, still frowning. I crawled past, constantly grabbed by cold fingers reaching out, clinging to my elbow or collar. They fumbled, desperately searching for any place to hold on. Sharp pinches on my belly fat, my shoulder, my chest. Then they started reaching for my eyes. At one point I cried out, and a cold, slightly hairy finger slid into my mouth. It was only when I dropped to my hands and knees and crawled that they stopped clinging as much. All that time, my head spun with the horrifying thought that I was truly being led in circles forever and they would never let me go. I would die there in the dark, suffocated by those decaying hands. Damn it, I almost gave up. When the flashlight's beam finally swept across an open space, I burst into tears. A choked sob, both relief and joy, and my muscles were infused with new vigor. Working frantically to pull myself from that nightmare, I lunged into the open space and slammed my forehead against a steel wall. I looked up. The secure door at last. The place where we had kept him frozen. I scrambled to my feet with what little dignity I had left, brushed myself off, and glanced back just once. The bodies were now still, just as they had been before I entered. I could lie to myself that it was all imagination. If not for half of my shirt, which was torn and lying on the floor, several shreds still caught in their hands. I tried to compose myself, then stepped into the cold chamber. We hadn't left him in a decent state. The plan was to catalog everything. Yes, we had removed the most obvious anomalies, but the remaining flesh, we wanted to know everything. Every capillary, every cell, we wanted to record it, so a special machine was flown in. It worked by taking a sample of flesh, slicing it so thin it was less than 1 micron, and placing it on a slide. It was digitized and then stored in a specialized cold storage unit. Normally, the machine was used for samples the size of a potato, but for him, we ordered a custom-made one, frozen, upright. We placed him on the machine and it sliced away, 1 slice every 3 hours. Except later, no one came to collect the slices anymore. They piled up in a dreadful mess on the floor, and no one bothered to check if he was still dead. How foolish. Of course, he came back to life. Only this time, he didn't escape the cave. I often wonder if he had anything left to say. But when I arrived, the machine had already cut to his nose, only his eyes and the top of his head watched me. Following me, God, we had butchered everything. Compared to us, the Romans were gentle. I knelt and pleaded for forgiveness. And the worst part was, he truly granted it. Not with words, of course, but you wouldn't be surprised to know he had other ways of putting thoughts into my head. I was furiously angry at myself. I was certain a judgment awaited. But no, he forgave. He said I was loved after all I had done. God, that's what hurt the most. I'm not worthy. Still not. Then he gave me the Third Testament, or rather an abridged version, not enough to drive me mad, but enough of the gist. Still, it wrecked me. When I stopped sobbing on the floor and looked up, he was gone. Nothing remained, only broken glass and the machine cutting into empty space. Crawling back through the tunnel wasn't any easier than going in, but I barely remember it. I lost weeks after that trip into the basement. Then, finally, I woke up in my office. From then on, I stayed above ground. I asked for rescue, but the organization believed I served the country best by staying put, watching to ensure nothing else leaked out. It sounds cruel, but this time, they might be right. I once thought about sharing what he gave me, even considered writing it in these very lines. There were times I thought of going down, retrieving the entire scripture, and uploading it. But that would mean reading it. And as I said, I'm a coward and I don't want to die. Everyone who read the scripture took their own lives. All I can reveal is that the Third Testament is like a warning, a sketch of what's on its way. So bad that he had to come again just to offer us an escape, a promise that there's another place, and an acknowledgement that we will need it. I thought of Coach again, the smartest person I'd ever met. And his first reaction after learning what was coming was to try to create something that could wipe out humanity. Given what we did to him, I wonder if we deserve it. Every Christmas, my family sets traps in the chimney. I never understood why until one year we finally caught something. That year, my traps didn't work. In fact, they never did. The week before Christmas, the whole family went shopping. First, the craft store for the kids, then the hardware store for the adults. Down the colorful aisles, Mariah Carey blared in the background. I excitedly clutched a pack of orange happy pencils. Both ends were flat. They reminded me of the scaffolding construction workers used to build around the school. Anything was possible. I bought another bag of rubber bands to tie them together. In my head, I'd already designed a cool slingshot that would fire marbles and staples at intruders. On Christmas Eve, my sister and I sat at our respective tables, getting to work on our traps with the materials we'd chosen. I had pencils. My sister, a few years younger than me, was busy sculpting something with pipe cleaners and modeling clay. I remember sniffing disdainfully, thinking what she was trying to make wouldn't even work. At the table next to us, Mom was also making traps. I always thought adults weren't very creative. Yet every year, Mom's creations made my stomach churn. She liked broken light bulbs hung by string. That year, she prepared 5 or 6 more to nail inside the chimney. She also made heavy wooden planks thickly studded with rusty nails and old, bent knives, their serrated tips piercing through. Every year she made the same things, standing alone at her table, sawing, nailing, hammering, sweat beading on her forehead. Dad worked in the garage. There was a welding torch there, something called a lathe, and lots of other interesting tools. Dad's traps were almost always made of rusty iron with razor-sharp edges. Squeaking hinges, trembling springs that made even my childish fingers shiver. This time, when Dad emerged from the workshop, he presented something that looked like a cannon attached to a compressed air tank, like the diving tanks I'd seen on divers' backs. Just step on the pressure plate, and a sharp metal dart would blast out of the barrel, over a meter long, with a bang that nearly made my heart leap out of my chest. We all jumped at the test fire. Dad chuckled, then spent the next 30 minutes muttering curses and fumbling to reload the dart. Then he set about hiding the whole contraption in the fireplace. It required a bit of digging into the floor. There was a moment when Dad knelt among the soot and ash, reaching out to me, calling me Alex, asking me to hand him the air tank. Before I could move, Mom stepped in and did it herself. Of course, she couldn't lift it, so she had to roll and drag it in sections. Dad remained silent throughout. It was always like that whenever anyone mentioned my older brother. The whole family would fall silent. Alex could lift that air tank as if it were nothing. He was big and strong from a young age, even bigger than Dad. He was like our grandfather, a giant standing 65. Later, my gym teacher would lament that I hadn't inherited any of those genes. My sister and I were both like Dad, big-boned, but not as muscular as our grandfather. Everything was in place. Stones and ash were restored. The pressure plate and tripwires were hidden beneath realistic-looking Christmas decorations. Bear traps were covered with old clothes and empty boxes, and Mom's knife-studded planks lay under painstakingly crafted false floorboards. My sister and I handed our traps to our parents. They were carefully placed amidst the other elaborate preparations. I loved that moment. I don't know why. Looking back, it was probably the feeling that we were a team, a family. We had a part to play. I was still afraid of the dark, and my sister was only just starting to understand. But we were contributing. And God, since Alex was gone, how I yearned to contribute. My brother's image was distant to me. I loved him, but I knew almost nothing about him. How could I, when I was so young? I grew up in a world where my parents cried a lot and argued even more. To the point where sometimes they themselves admitted they argued for no reason at all. They argued because of the pain. Because even after my sister was born, they still didn't dare touch Alex's room, didn't dare truly mention him without falling into an awkward, aching silence. So for that brief moment, standing there looking at the fireplace and the living room, that was our family's version of perfect happiness. Then it was bedtime for the two youngest. I loved our special Christmas bed, warm and private. Mom turned the TV up full blast. No one minded if we overate sweets or secretly watched forbidden movies, as long as we stayed in the basement. Blankets and pillows piled high, we built forts to our heart's content, and no one came down to check what time we tucked ourselves in. But however eager we were, we usually didn't make it past midnight. Our small bodies could only take so much. Mom and Dad stayed awake. I thought that was normal. You only understand their sacrifices once you become a parent yourself. I didn't know what it was like for Dad, then nearly 50, to stay awake all night, standing straight, or for Mom to do the same. They would take turns gently waking each other when one nodded off. That was the year I lost the privilege of ignorance. I don't know if it's true that the most beautiful and worst moments of life often overlap, or if it's just some kind of spotlight effect. I don't know. That night, my sister and I snuck into the basement, climbed into our blanket fort, and put on the ending story. My sister fell asleep after 10 minutes, but I watched until the very end. I can still see everything as clearly as if it were happening now, one of the happiest and most innocent moments of my life. I drifted off as the credits rolled, dreaming sweetly of a dragon of my own to ride, soaring over the school. I think that was it, the last time I was truly a child. Everyone has a memory like that, don't they? The moment you stop being a kid. The next thing I remember is waking up in a cold gray light, my eyelids heavy, my head fuzzy. Something was wrong and I could feel it. Everything was silent, cold, and there was a draft. My sister was nowhere to be seen. It took me a moment to realize the lights were off, the TV was off, and I was only seeing the basement by the faint glow filtering down from the upstairs hallway. Strange. Mom and Dad always locked the basement door and bolted it from the other side. Tonight, it was wide open, and something up there, to my childish eyes, looked ominous. I don't know how to describe it. I just know I woke up and everything felt off. I sat bolt upright, crept out of bed, hoping to see a brighter world pouring down the stairs at any moment. Dad and Mom, carrying my sister, waking me up. Christmas was here. Maybe they just let me sleep in, maybe it was snowing outside. Perhaps that's why the light was so pale and diffused. God, how I longed for a white Christmas, like on TV, in movies, in magazines, always pristine white. But where we lived, it was only gentle drizzle. The nights were black at the windows, the wind howled, puddles reflected streetlights. My only memory of my grandmother was her softly singing, "Rain, rain, go away, come again another day." No face, just her singing that nursery rhyme. Like Alex, she was someone I knew mostly through the sadness she left in others. I crawled on all fours up the stairs, instinctively telling myself to be quiet. Years of eavesdropping on my parents' arguments had taught me how to place my weight on the edge of the step, where the wood was strongest. Whenever I spied on them mid-argument, Mom usually stood somewhere, thin and sad, arms crossed, smelling faintly of cigarettes. I thought of that scene as I reached the top of the stairs, pausing to sniff, wondering if I'd smell smoke from somewhere in the house. Instead, I faintly caught a slight burning scent, similar to old firecrackers or sparklers, the smell of soot, not cigarette smoke, and in that charred scent there was something else. A metallic smell, slightly sweet. Finally, I lifted my head, peered over the last step, glancing left then right, down the hallway stretching in both directions. For a long time, nothing. I stood still, frozen, unsure what to do. Then somewhere to the right, near the kitchen door, the faint glow of early morning light shifted. Someone was definitely moving in there, casting a shadow. Of course, it could be Mom or Dad, I told myself, but I still didn't move. Someone was in there, utterly silent, silent as death. When I gathered enough courage, I moved again, but in the opposite direction. Not yet 10, but even children have animal instincts. Stay away from anyone that still. I crept towards the living room, letting the old carpet swallow my sounds. Looking inside, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Like a bomb had exploded. The sofa was ripped open, the coffee table shattered. All the Christmas decorations were crushed under ripped-up floorboards and a torn section of carpet. Bear Trap stood upright, jaws clamped shut, teeth biting down. Dad's cannon was broken in half, the oxygen tank stuck in the wall, the barrel bent and lying twisted on the floor. The dangling traps made my heart pound. I had never thought of them this way, but every year they were a part of our home's decorations. Strange, yes, but no less important than other people's homemade ornaments. My eyes darted everywhere, seeing the history of my home in disarray, and my childish heart felt like breaking. Because I just wanted to put everything back, to return the room to its pristine state of last night when we were a happy family. Maybe Dad's invention malfunctioned. One year he almost burned the house down, so thinking that strange piston blew everything up wasn't a stretch. Pressure built up, boom. Still no one in the house, no sign of anyone caught in a trap, not a trace of blood. Back in the hallway, I looked towards the light from the kitchen door. No more movement, but the silence made my skin crawl. Wrong, everything was wrong. At this point, the best option was to try upstairs. Same old routine, hugging the wall near the main door where the stairs led up, then stealthily climbing on all fours. I took each step, disappearing silently like a cat. My room was empty, my sister's room too. Her room had a large window. I looked out and saw the sun beginning to rise. The thick, hazy morning light made everything pale and cold, as if the whole world was holding its breath. In a way, it was. My parents' room initially seemed empty too. I almost left if I hadn't noticed the dark, thick shadow under the bed. I was glad I stopped. I paused and looked closer. The light filtering underneath gave me the feeling it wasn't empty in the usual way. Before my imagination could play tricks, my sister's face peeked out from the darkness. I almost cried out in joy, but her expression was grim. Not just scared or worried, but almost sickly pale, eyes wide open, as if she didn't recognize me. I crawled towards her, reaching out to touch her hand. She flinched, retreating deeper into the shadows. Something was wrong. I squeezed in beside her, searching for injuries, trying to stay calm so I wouldn't frighten her further. She seemed normal. All I could do was hold her, soothing her until she wasn't so stunned. When I whispered the first words, my voice sounded too loud, even though the only sound was the parting of my lips. She recoiled when I spoke, making me feel like I had just broken the most precious silence in the world. But I had to ask, I needed to know where Mom and Dad were. She just shook her head. I asked again, even softer, "Where?" Finally, she replied, just to make me stop asking. She pulled away from my embrace. She loved me, but she was a beast in a den, and I was about to ruin her hiding place. "He took them upstairs," was all she said, pointing a finger at the ceiling. Those 5 words flowed through me, hiding a truth. Mom and Dad were dead. I hated that thought. My skin tingled with a sickening itch. The nook we were hiding in suddenly became cramped and suffocating. A wave of heat rose in my throat, threatening to make me cry. She had actually said we were orphans. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be left alone. I wanted them to come back and hold us. For some reason, I shook my head in disbelief. I crawled out from under the bed, looking for them. I glanced back to see if she was following, but she remained still, ready to let me go alone to my fate. She vanished into the shadows. I was left with one fragile comfort. At least she was probably safe there. Out of sight, out of mind. I crept out of my parents' room, realizing I didn't have many options. There was a phone on the downstairs landing, next to the main door, or I could run down the slope to the nearest house, about 400 meters away. Not far normally, but I really wanted to burst out the door and into the open, trusting God that whatever had just passed through a forest of traps, as if it were nothing, wouldn't see me running across the open space. It was better to call for help, better to reach the phone. I thought of my grandfather, my mother's father, a giant who scared the whole family. He, a tall man, would often tell stories my mother told us not to listen to, like, "Because of your grandmother, you have to fear the chimney every Christmas." I didn't like him. He smelled of damp must and earth. He told terrible stories from his days working at the slaughterhouse, stories that made you want to cry. But at that moment, I couldn't think of anyone better to call for help. I slid down the stairs as silently as I'd climbed. I lifted the receiver off the phone as if holding something explosive. I didn't know what would make a sound. I didn't know if the table leg was loose, if it would tilt, if the plastic would crack, or if the dial tone would be too loud. When you're trying to be silent, everything is dangerous. Every movement, every object, everything can expose you. One reason I thought of him was that his number was on speed dial. I pressed 3, put the receiver to my ear, and listened to it ring. I was tense because of that sound, however faint, and just prayed for this part to be over quickly. My eyes never left the hallway, which turned towards the basement and kitchen. Scattered creaking sounds echoed from somewhere, making my skin prickle. I'd never had such a long and agonizing wait in my life. Finally, when it stopped, there was no relief. My grandfather didn't know how to speak softly. Old men often don't. I didn't expect his voice to be so loud. "Hello, Alice, are you there?" Perhaps it was the atmosphere, but it sounded like he was roaring right in the room. Fearing the sound would carry, I slammed the receiver down with a asterisk thump asterisk. The small bell in the machine jingled from the impact. If anyone was truly in the house, they must have heard it. I didn't wait. I ran, not bothering with the stairs, still trying to be as quiet as possible but prioritizing speed. As I climbed, I thought I was overreacting, but no. From the kitchen came the sound of breaking glass, the clatter of metal as if someone had ripped out an entire drawer of spoons and forks and thrown it against the wall. Whatever was in there, it was moving faster than it should have. Heavy, thudding footsteps rapidly closed the invisible distance, rounding the corner towards the main door, towards the bottom of the stairs. Just as I scrambled over the top step, collapsing onto the floor, a wave of terror washed over me like an electric current. All the paranoia from earlier now seemed trivial. Like running from the bathroom to your bed because you think something's lurking in the dark, but deep down you know there's nothing there. This, however, was a deep, gnawing fear. I heard something smash the phone and the small table where I had just stood. Primal fear surged through me. I crawled on my belly as fast as I could towards the nearest door, my room. My vision pulsed, my guts twisted, urging me to crawl faster, faster, like a soldier under fire. Inside, I hesitated for a second, wondering if I should hide under the bed like my sister. Not safe enough. I wanted something more, a door, a wall between me and whatever had made that noise. The closet made sense, full of old clothes to squeeze into, and on top, there was a small hatch to the attic. A flurry of ideas flashed through my mind in an instant. I veered towards the closet just as I heard the first heavy footstep on the stairs. My God, it was heavy. The wood groaned, the handrail splintered as it heaved itself up. My breathing was so heavy it was almost a whimper with each movement. I almost lost control of my muscles and bladder, as if a thin thread was holding all of me together, body, mind, sanity waiting for a snap to shatter, collapse into a heap, wet myself, and choke on silent sobs. I don't know how I managed to get into the closet so silently. I opened the door, slid inside without a sound, then pressed my eye to a crack in the slats, waiting for something. Whatever it was standing on the landing, breathing. By now, I thought it was some kind of mutated beast. A twisted reindeer, perhaps, given the season, the heavy thudding footsteps fueling that thought. But when it poked its head into my room, I saw something human or formerly human. Hard to say. Even now, in our family, we don't talk about it before that night or after, not even during family gatherings. Full of relatives from various branches, all gathered to discuss how to deal with the curse, whatever it was that deliberately plays on our expectations. Talking about it makes you sound crazy, even to your own family. I don't know how to properly articulate it. You feel foolish, and it makes the problem sound foolish too, as if it doesn't need to be taken seriously. Of course, the curse isn't a blind force. It has a sense of humor, a cruel teasing habit. Certainly, it hurts everything it does. All the dead, and there were many, because my grandmother had many children and they had more children. At the last gathering, there were 11 households, enough victims for it to choose from, but all the pain lands on the roof, goes down the chimney, retreats safely. If only one trap is merely grazed, it's a damn game. Tricks, it plays tricks and always has. This game has rules, so our house must have a chimney, otherwise it would behave unpredictably. And that's why the thing that poked its head into my room was wearing a Santa hat and a white beard. I hate having to detail this. Hate having to mention that the worst night of my life was just a joke to it, but it was. It wore a red hat and a white beard, and honestly, the sight was soul-harrowing, especially for a 10-year-old. Not human, not quite animal, it looked like a preserved corpse, something shriveled and conserved, found somewhere in the Alaskan tundra. Then a scientist declares it's an Ice Age human, perhaps it really was dead. From its lipless mouth, fringed with yellowish teeth, it oozed a dirty gray fluid, its cheap nylon beard matted with the stuff. God, just remembering it, I can still smell it. The demon peered in, then vanished in a few seconds. It didn't know which room I had gone into, so it just glanced here and then moved on. A part of me wanted to scream to save my sister, but even if I wanted to, my limbs were paralyzed, I couldn't do it. I just thought it would eventually come back to this room when it didn't find me elsewhere. Maybe it would find my sister first, I dared not think further. I only imagined it returning, banging around, ransacking drawers, peeking under the bed. And eventually, it would turn towards the closet, see the gap in the slats, and immediately understand where I had been hiding all along. I had to leave this place. Looking up, I remembered the attic hatch right above the shelf. That was my best, in fact, my only chance. I started climbing, but no more quiet, cat-like stealth. I'd never practiced climbing a closet. Before I reached the third shelf, I dropped an old transformer robot. It hit the floor with a dry plastic thud. Normally, elsewhere, that sound would be nothing, but for me, and for the thing outside, it was like a gunshot. The head that had just vanished immediately roared and lunged into the room. I climbed with trembling arms, nearly slipping from the shelf. I didn't dare look back. I reached the top, pushed open the hatch, and pulled myself through, just in time to hear the closet door ripped off its hinges, falling completely open. I still couldn't help but glance back once. And it was right there, grinning. It saw me. It knew where I was. Nowhere to hide, only to run. This time, I truly couldn't hold my bladder. One of its clawed hands snatched the edge of the attic opening. I knew I had to keep running. Just run, keep moving. I didn't know the attic layout, but it didn't matter anymore. I had to put as much distance as possible between us. The problem was, the path wasn't clear as in most houses. My house was crammed with old things up here. At first, turning back, I saw stacks of tightly packed boxes. I almost panicked at the claustrophobic labyrinth ahead. But as I had to crawl on my hands and knees through the only tunnel made of plastic and cardboard, I suddenly felt hope. Maybe it couldn't follow. That hope pushed me to crawl faster. But I was only halfway when the overwhelming smell of rotting flesh washed over me, signaling that it was closer than I dared imagine. Then the meager light completely vanished, and something grabbed my ankle. I screamed. This should have been the moment I jolted awake. Something should have stopped the terror. I pulled violently at the boxes around me. They crashed down, old furniture and picture frames tumbling. I clutched at everything, hoping to hold on. But the thing was huge. It dragged me out like a hunter pulling a rabbit from its burrow. For a moment, it dangled me upside down, examining me, and I looked into its hollow black eyes and emaciated face, pockmarked with sores. It smirked. It pulled something from behind its back and set it on the floor, and before I understood what was happening, it shoved me into a sack and slung me over its shoulder. The world blurred, my mind constricted, everything shrinking to a point. I struggled to prevent the worst images from flashing into my mind. It was dragging me back to its lair. Its damn mouth, agape, was going to swallow me whole. Killed, dismembered, tortured. I don't know if you can imagine the feeling of a child curled in darkness, facing their own death. No, but that moment broke me, completely beyond repair. To this day, I am a broken person, because of that moment. So much so that when it tossed me onto the fireplace hearth, I didn't bother to fight or look for an escape. I knew where it was taking me, up the chimney, where else? It was too late, this battle was lost. If anything, at that moment, I just wanted it all to end quickly. I wanted to follow my parents, but that moment stretched on endlessly. Seconds became minutes, I held my breath, waiting for the nightmare to shift. No, it must be preparing something. What? How long? Finally, I peered through the rough fabric of the sack. A little light filtered in. Just enough for me to dimly see the devastated living room. The mouth of the sack was loosely tied, leaving a small gap where the rope hadn't been pulled tight. And there, like a bizarre reminder, a broken HP pencil, a tiny bit of color in my trap, one night, one sleep. The only thing separating this nightmare from yesterday, when we were happy, or nearly so. I remembered it wasn't just me this thing had taken. It had taken Mom, Dad, even Alex. Alex, whom I only knew through vague memories and the room Mom didn't like me to go into. And there was a very high chance it would take my sister too. All of us would disappear, leaving behind a house of broken pieces no one cared about. No Christmas tree, no presents, nothing. Something welled up inside me. Anger, a childish tantrum. I was going to die anyway, right? I'd lost everything. So why not? I reached out, grabbed the pencil, and poked my head out of the sack. I saw it enter the room with my sister, hanging upside down by her ankle in its twisted hand. She was screaming. I only hoped this last act would somehow save her. I scrambled out of the sack, lunged at it, and stabbed the broken pencil into its booted foot. It immediately dropped my sister. And I remained kneeling on the floor, sobbing, head bowed, waiting for what was next, but there was nothing. Instead, it sighed. A weary sigh, bone deep, like parents sighing when they find their child has been too quiet for too long. In a gravelly, cracked voice, it spoke, a heavy lisp, forcing words through broken teeth. Almost. Good traps this year, little one, but I won't fall for it twice. It pulled the pencil from its foot with a clawed hand, clicked its heels, and left, and I blacked out before I could hear the rest. I met a beautiful girl on Tinder, but some of her requests bothered me. I've never been sure if I was stupid for missing the signs or just a normal guy. Sarah was sweet, outwardly checking all the boxes, though a bit clumsy. But so what? Everyone's clumsy sometimes, right? I tried to overlook the little things. Thinking about it, anyone can be a little quirky, especially when nervous. It's just that Sarah's particular brand of quirk, looking back, I should have paid more attention to. Each individual sign was harmless. When we first started dating, she was very forward, always touching, holding, winking. She'd make dark, funny innuendos, constantly blurring the line between appropriate and inappropriate. I like women with a dark sense of humor, and she had plenty of that. But whenever I tried to reciprocate, she'd pull back, and I quickly understood that sex wasn't going to happen for a long time. I accepted it. I wasn't in a hurry. Yet she kept sending mixed signals. She asked for pictures almost every night. Normal girls don't usually ask for full-body nudes. It was weird, and taking decent ones wasn't as easy as I thought. I always felt awkward in those full-length vertical shots, but she was always satisfied with what I sent. She had a lot of requests. One was for me to lie stretched out on the floor, eyes closed, arms at my sides on my back. She loved that kind of picture. Once she made me perform a striptease with a sheet, wrapping myself in a white sheet and slowly pulling it down, a little with each picture. That went on for about the first month. I sent her pictures, and she sent them back to me. We talked a lot about what we both wanted. It was quite fun and a bit kinky, like we were taking turns being long-distance models for each other, and men like us rarely get to experience being a sexual object. Normally, I still thought my sexiness had to be tied to some kind of performance, so to be appreciated purely as a body was novel and exciting. I didn't hate it. I didn't think I had exhibitionist tendencies or that women would find that so appealing. But she liked it, and I didn't hate it. Throughout that time, we still met once or twice a week for meals. It seemed like a casual thing, something that might eventually turn into something serious. We never spent the night together. The first time I thought we were getting somewhere was after I sent her a picture of me lying on the cold white tiles of my kitchen floor, chilling my backside. An hour after I sent the picture, she unexpectedly showed up at my door, hair soaking wet, smelling strongly of alcohol. The moment she saw me, she grabbed me, led me to the sofa, climbed onto me, and kissed me passionately. She touched me a lot, but not too much, her hands hot, breathless, and frankly, not very good. Have you ever wondered if some people are bad in bed just because no one ever tells them directly? She kissed like she wanted to suck all the air from my lungs. My dog kisses better. Don't misunderstand, she got a pretty good score for enthusiasm. No one had ever touched me with such fierce passion. But whenever I tried to match her energy, I felt like she wasn't interested. No reaction, no soft moans, no signal, no words like, "Do that more." It was all about her touching me, never the other way around. About 20 minutes in, as she fumbled and stroked me through my clothes, she told me to lie on the floor. I didn't know what she was planning, but I complied. "Can you hold your breath?" she asked, leaning down to look at me. Suddenly, I felt tiny, my mind buzzing with all sorts of thoughts. In that moment, there was probably nothing I wouldn't do for her, though not necessarily because I wanted to. There was something in her gaze, an intensity that forced me to shrink, to become as small as an ant. So I held my breath, held it until my lungs burned, my head spun, until I couldn't take it anymore. I opened my eyes to see her looking at me with a hunger that somewhat startled me, and truthfully, I somewhat liked. She paused for a few seconds, looking at me as if drinking with her eyes, then said she had to go. She had work tomorrow. We kissed goodbye at the door, her hand stroking my back. I was freezing, her hand was warm. I swore something was finally going to happen. Yet she just left me standing there, confused and annoyed, to the point where I almost didn't contact her again. But she had an overwhelming energy, a clear sense of what she wanted and didn't want, enough for me to keep replying to her messages. From that night on, whenever she asked for pictures, I'd lie on the kitchen floor and take them, but none of them made her rush to my door like that day. Still, she gradually became a familiar part of my life, and soon I hoped we'd move towards something a little more serious. I looked for signs that she felt the same, but everything dragged on, slow as molasses. By winter, we were still in limbo, and the only thing that changed was how she held my hand. She would often sandwich my cold hands between hers, then press them against her cheek, her neck, sometimes even her chest. Many times it was pleasant. I had to work hard to get her to visit my house again, you know what I was hoping for. But in the end, she made us spend most of our time out on the balcony, stargazing, hugging in the biting cold. She even made me take off my coat and give it to her, even though I offered to go inside and get another one. It had to be the one I was wearing, and she wouldn't let me change. When I finally went inside, I felt like I was on the verge of pneumonia. The rush of warm air made me dizzy. "Lie down," she pleaded. "Lie on the floor, I have an idea." I was shivering uncontrollably, my fingertips blue. When she returned, she had a glass of red wine in her hand. She stood over me, cradling the glass in her palms to warm it, then gave a clear command. "Take a sip," she said. "Hold it in your mouth, close your eyes, don't open them, and don't swallow the wine." I didn't like wine, and I had been quite annoyed all evening, but there was a strange tension in the air. Her electric anticipation spread to me. I didn't know what she was planning, but in the past, when I felt this vague, it sometimes led to novel, interesting experiences. Without warning, she kissed me, pushing her tongue into the warm wine until it spilled from the corners of my mouth. At the same time, with a single, sharp motion, she pressed the heel of her hand onto my diaphragm, so hard that the wine sprayed from my mouth into hers. I choked, she choked. My first reaction was undisguised annoyance. I was genuinely, surprisingly angry. And with the hope that had just blossomed in my mind, disappointment turned into irritation. I just wanted a normal kiss, a normal sign of affection. Did she understand how tired I was after shivering on the balcony just so she could feel polite by offering me her coat? I gently but firmly pushed her away. "Don't do that again," I said, my voice choked. "What were you trying to do?" "Nothing," she cried. "Nothing at all, just trying something different." She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I was half aroused, half annoyed, half freezing, and entirely exasperated. I didn't kick her out, but she clearly felt the atmosphere change and used some excuse. I cursorily wiped myself off as she went to the bathroom, and when she emerged, I immediately handed her her purse and keys. I didn't even walk her to the door. She stood on the threshold, her lips sadly pursed. I ignored her, starting to scrub the kitchen floor. "It looks like a crime scene," I grumbled. She might have said something before she left, but I didn't look up until I heard the door close. After that, we were silent for a while. Looking back now, this is typical of what I do. A few days later, I sat reviewing our dates and realized I had been doing all the work. It was always me taking the initiative, pushing things further, whether it was going out, calling, trying to move the relationship forward. I told myself that if there was any hope of something serious, this time she had to be the one to come back, apologize, explain, and contact me first. Of course, at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Maybe she was just clumsy, I thought. Maybe it was nerves. I couldn't understand the wine incident. It was too random. I knew a fair bit about the BDSM things people were into. If only I could pigeonhole her behavior into a specific kink, I would have been more confident in deciding if we were compatible. But lacking information, my mind was just a thick mess of confusion. I wanted to like her, but if there was no chance, if we were incompatible, I wanted closure. As it was, I didn't know what we were or what the hell we had been doing all this time. Nevertheless, when she finally texted asking if I could pick her up after her shift, I said yes. I wanted closure, and maybe I imagined it, but her tone sounded somewhat remorseful. That feeling intensified when I met her in the hospital parking lot where she worked, seeing her sitting on the hood of my car, wearing a breathtakingly beautiful bright red dress. The moment I got out of the car, she took my hand and said she had prepared a special little date for us, that she would make up for everything. The way she kissed me, the way she led me by the hand along the curb, there was something entirely different about it. A decisiveness that immediately told me this time she wanted to go all the way. Clearly, she had made up her mind. Some threshold had just been crossed, and I wanted to see where it would lead. She didn't work in the main hospital building, but rather a smaller one on the same campus. Red brick, quiet, only 2 stories from the outside, making me wonder what her specific job actually was. Inside, there was a strong chemical smell, but at first glance, it looked like a normal general practice clinic. There was a tiny reception desk with a chair or two, a few computers on the counter, and a row of examination rooms behind. It was after hours, so no one else was there. Only a few lights were on in the reception area, other places were dark. She quickly went upstairs, saying she would change into something more comfortable, and I sat down to wait. At least she locked the door behind her, meaning no one else would come in. I took that as a good sign, but uneasiness still churned. Where were we, and why had she chosen this place for our date? I tried to sit, but it felt like waiting for a strange dental appointment, so I got up and paced, listening for faint thudding sounds upstairs. I couldn't tell what she was rummaging through. Outside, it grew dark, cars thinned, rain poured, all making the small room feel even more isolated, like a forgotten corner, though the hospital and the flow of traffic were still visible behind. Having nothing else to do but wander around, I quickly noticed a door left ajar, as if someone had forgotten to close it. It was the only door I could reach without climbing over anything, so curiosity won out. I approached, and about half a meter away, I realized the most dreadful chemical smell was emanating from there. Now that I'd noticed, I might as well open it and see what was inside. I pushed the door open a crack or two, peering into the pitch black. Using my phone light, I saw a staircase leading down to the basement. The thudding upstairs indicated she wasn't coming down immediately. I had time to check. I put one foot on the step, looking around, seeing nothing. I went down another step, then another, until a row of automatic lights flickered on with a loud asterisk clunk and the hiss of fluorescent bulbs starting up. I don't know what I was expecting, but what I saw initially left me speechless. Then I still didn't know. A sterile room with mottled white tiles, a few counters along the walls covered with shiny silver instruments I didn't recognize. One wall was lined with metal cabinets in neat rows, and 3 steel gurneys in the middle of the room. One gurney had a person on it, a vague human shape covered by a white sheet, with a man's foot poking out at the end. The strange color and odd skin texture immediately told me he wasn't just napping. Not to mention the toe tag was a dead giveaway. This was a morgue. She worked at a morgue, and this place, of all places, she chose for our final date. My first reaction was to go upstairs, confront her, yell, and leave immediately after making her open the door. But something held me back. I couldn't name it. The anger came quickly and faded quickly, leaving behind a chilling curiosity, a thought I didn't even dare to name in my head. Instead of turning to leave, I stood still for a few seconds to make sure she wasn't right behind me, then started down the remaining steps. The walk to the corpse felt like 10 miles, each step too loud, each breath a shaky gasp that could turn into a shout at any moment. I was terrified. In my head, I kept picturing that faceless figure turning to look at me or sitting up with a single fluid motion. I suddenly understood why ghosts are often depicted as walking white sheets. Someone must have had the same morbid fascination as me, the imaginary scene of a shrouded figure lunging in the darkness. Just as my brain was playing tricks on me, curiosity pushed me forward. I couldn't turn back. Not now. Then I stood beside the gurney, and with a trembling hand, I pulled back the sheet. He looked vaguely like me. Perhaps before the bloating, we would have been quite similar. Blood type, hair, facial structure, race, age. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that Sarah was just a quirky girl. People who work in this field get desensitized to these things. And for her, this building was simply an empty, convenient place to bring her boyfriend. But the body on the gurney, I don't know how to describe it. It triggered something in me, a very slow-rising fear. I'm not sure why I did what I did next, but I kept thinking about the night she pressed on my chest to make the wine spurt from my mouth. So bizarre, but what if? I placed the heel of my hand on the cold diaphragm of the man, pressing down. The entire body jolted like a puppet. A short asterisk thump sound, then putrid blood spurted from his mouth. Black, yellow, red, platelets and plasma had separated into a thick, viscous substance. The smell hit me, I couldn't help it. I doubled over towards a nearby drain and vomited until I was empty, bitter bile and stomach acid. As I retched, images of my months with Sarah flashed through my mind. Pictures of me naked on white tile, the blanket-covered chest, her obsession with my cold hands. The night I sat shivering on the balcony, she filled my mouth with wine, then pressed my chest to make it spray out. I looked at the corpse and immediately understood why, and how she discovered what happened when you pressed on a chest. The image was clear as a film, her slender body straddling the bloated man in front of me, both disgusting and impossible to shake, like fingernails on a chalkboard. I couldn't stop. I bent over and vomited again. This time until my eyes burned and only saliva and bitter bile remained. I felt violated. I wanted to get out of here. I was no longer angry or confused. Every moment of the past 6 months clicked into place, forming a pattern that horrified me. She wasn't awkward or vague. Everything she did had been building towards tonight. She and I were locked in this place, no one to call for help. I had naively walked into perhaps the most dangerous situation of my life. And now I was too deep in the trap for blind panic. Downstairs, a room with only one exit. I had to be careful, she was up there somewhere. Maybe she didn't know I had figured it out, maybe she did. She was small, but one glance at the rows of glistening blades on the table made me understand. She didn't need to be strong to hurt me. Any of those sharp instruments could slice into my throat with little effort. Sooner or later, she would realize where I was. Sooner or later, her plan had to have a finale. I looked up at the stairs. If she came down from the upper floor, she would see the lights down here and immediately know I was here. I wrestled with whether to go upstairs and pretend I hadn't seen anything. The thought of walking up there, fabricating a few confused sentences. I'm a little tired. I think I should go home, smiling politely, nodding. Could I pull off such a clumsy act? That's assuming she would believe it, and assuming her next move still needed me conscious or alive. I imagined her suddenly lunging with a scalpel, silently slicing across my neck, the steel blade cutting through cartilage. What if she was small? I didn't know what she planned to do or where she was lurking. Walking straight into an ambush wasn't a good idea. I needed distance. I needed a door or a window just to escape her. My first instinct told me to get out of the basement, and I intended to follow it, but the strange sounds upstairs made me think she had realized the reception desk was empty. Panicked, I frantically scanned for an exit, or at least a temporary hiding spot. All sorts of crazy ideas flashed through my mind, including lying down in place of the corpse. The thought was so absurd it was almost funny, but my eyes suddenly stopped at the row of morgue drawers. And with a sickening drop in my stomach, I realized there was no other place in this room large enough to hide a person. Eichel, her voice, muffled and distant by the walls and floor, reached me, but I knew she was starting to look for me. It was now or never. I took a deep breath, pulled the handle of the first empty drawer. A wave of both relief and disgust washed over me. At least I didn't have to share this space with anyone. I wasn't even sure I had the guts to do that, but there was no other way. I slid in feet first, retreating into the darkness, trying not to think of cold hands grabbing my ankles. Then I gently pulled the door shut. The click sounded just as I heard footsteps descending. They stopped halfway, and I distinctly heard her hiss, "Damn it!" Before turning on her heel and running back upstairs, she must have thought I had seen the body and escaped another way. Either way, it bought me some time. I opened the drawer door from the inside latch. Trying to push away the terrifying question of why it would even need such an equipped space, I crept out onto the tiled floor. Then I climbed the stairs as slowly as possible, one step at a time, until I reached the door at the top of the basement. Fortunately, she had left it ajar. A habit, it seemed. I peered into the darkness beyond. While I was in the basement, it had grown completely dark. Now only the headlights of passing cars swept across the reception room. Sharp, amber streaks of light flickered by, one after another erratically. They only showed me fragmented glimpses: a chair, a computer, the edge of a counter. I had to squint, patiently waiting for a few more sweeps of light before I noticed an office door in the back was open. Along with agitated footsteps echoing from within, she was rummaging through something. This was my best chance to escape. I tiptoed out of the basement, listening intently in all directions. Occasionally, she would let out a childish-sounding whine of complaint, the clatter-clack of cabinet doors opening. "Why did you do that, Michael?" she wailed. What surprised me was that her voice wasn't malicious, but wistful and sad, like a teenage girl in a huff. She genuinely didn't understand my reaction. For a second, I even dared to wonder if I had imagined too much. Right there on the counter was a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Maybe she really had intended a normal date. Maybe those connections were just my own imagination, but the image of the bloated, red and black corpse flashed in my mind. And in the end, I chose the safe option. I tried the main door, still locked. No other way. I continued upstairs, carefully pausing every few steps to listen for any change in her direction. Luckily, by the time I stepped onto the last stair, she had just left that room for another. "Oh, come on," she wailed. "Why are you like this?" I didn't have a clear plan. I guess my best chance was to find a window. I was about to ransack the upstairs floor when I stopped, startled by the sight before me. There were several rooms up here, but only one was open and lit. What I saw made me freeze, letting out a sharp gasp. The room was completely wrapped in plastic sheeting from floor to wall to ceiling. A small white table sat in the corner, on which were 3 open medicine bottles, a hacksaw, and several scalpels. Seeing all that, gazing directly into what she intended, my skin crawled. Another bottle of lotion made me want to vomit. I tried to swallow the nausea, telling myself those things no longer mattered because it wasn't surprising. She had chosen the room with a large window that was very easy to open. I pushed the plastic sheeting aside and unlatched it. The height below was nothing compared to the thought of staying another second in this cursed room. I began to climb out, putting one leg outside, trying to shift my weight so that if I slipped, I'd minimize injury. Just then, I heard a sound at the door. The rustle of plastic, the faint creak of hinges. I turned and saw her standing in the dark hallway. It was hard to see, but she wasn't smiling, not grinning like a madwoman, nor was she brandishing a knife. More than anything, she looked disappointed, perhaps even annoyed. Thinking back, it made sense. She had been planning this for a very long time. Not just the plastic-wrapped room, but the entire relationship from beginning to end had been shaped by her for this night. I waited for her to scream and lunge, but she only shook her head, letting out a soft moan. "It's not my fault." I tried to reply, but no words felt right. I jumped down, landing safely, only a slight ache in my knees, not as bad as the visions of shattered bones I'd imagined. Then, taking a deep breath and savoring the cold outdoor air, I bolted towards the hospital and the parking lot, where my car waited. You won't be surprised, I couldn't prove much afterwards. By the time the police visited the morgue, they were told everything was back to normal. Her side of the story was that I insisted on touring the morgue out of morbid curiosity, then became agitated when she didn't want to linger. It was hard to prove anything else. I had no injuries, no evidence of intent beyond suspicions of a series of twisted behaviors. In the end, the best the police could do was refer me to a lawyer specializing in restraining orders. He told me I needed actual evidence of harassment, and his main advice was to stay away from her. Because if anything happened, she was more likely to convince people that I was the problem, not her. It was her again. I had no choice but to move on. To be fair, I was glad to be alive, though the thought of her still out there kept me on edge. I had to assume she would find a new target because I had become enlightened. Though deep down, I hoped that missing out on me would give her pause. For my part, I deleted Tinder and decided that online dating was never going to be an option for me again. But the nightmare persisted, and I often thought of her frozen image in the doorway. At that moment, she wasn't as sad as I thought. It was all as if I was just slightly naughty. Months of nagging and scheming to prepare for murder, and yet at the last minute she stood there as if it were nothing more than a minor hitch. It didn't make sense, and like everything related to Sarah, I was stuck until I found an explanation. Today, I just did. I woke up feeling something strange on my big toe. I pulled back the covers, and the sight before me made my heart plummet. Cold sweat beaded down the back of my neck. I was wearing a toe tag. I fear I underestimated her patience. And now I understand why that night at the morgue was just a small stumble. On the tag, the first line read my name in looping cursive. Below, for the date of death, she had simply written, "In a few days." I proactively contacted my husband's mistress, and it was the worst mistake of my life. I wouldn't have believed he was cheating if not for the photos. I'd been cheated on before and learned one thing: a betrayer always wants to share their guilt. They inflate trivial issues into mountains because they want to believe and tell others that the relationship was already broken, which is why they slipped up, not the other way around. They make up silly reasons to argue because it's easier to say, "We were constantly fighting and disconnected," than "I slept with a stranger." My past experience was like that. I once had a boyfriend who flew into a rage just because I didn't answer my phone when I was out for the evening. Trivial matters that were nothing suddenly became evidence. I was sneaky and untrustworthy. Sure enough, a few days later, I caught him at Starbucks with a girl he'd met online. Do you think he told his parents? I left him because